Okay, we got part 3. A stolen book. After finishing our enjoyable meal, we returned to the temple. Ferdinand, won't the snow be troublesome when you head to Ahrensbach at the end of winter? I can't imagine you'll be able to transport your luggage by carriage, so what are you going to do? I asked. He and his retinue could simply fly through the air, but there was only so much they could carry with them. They have already prepared somewhere in Ahrensbach for us to live, I imagine. Elvira and Lambert prepared space for Aurelia, and while this engagement came at such short notice, that burden falls on Ahrensbach. Could y'all not do that? I just started. We will send spring and summer clothes alongside necessities of little importance now while there is no snow to worry about, then have the OB send the rest of my luggage once the snow melts. I myself will depart after the Royal Academy's graduation ceremony with little on me. The second trip was usually when the more valuable items were transported, and it was common for the owner to travel with them. Ferdinand didn't have enough leeway to wait for the snow to melt, though. He needed to complete all the necessary preparations for his marriage before the next Archduke Conference. Would you like me to use Leslie to move your luggage to the border gate? I asked. I may end up asking as much, depending on the time and circumstances. At the very least, that would reduce the risk of anything dangerous being mixed into the food or valuables. Ferdinand muttered, turning his eyes on the horizon beyond which Ahrensbach lay. High Bishop, High Priest, we have been awaiting your return, came the voice of a gate guard, loud enough to reach inside the carriage while the gate was being opened. I started to feel strangely unsettled, perhaps due to how relieved the man seemed to sound, and fixed my eyes on the carriage door. I wonder if something happened in the temple. What do you mean? Ferdinand asked. The guards don't usually speak to us like this. I wonder if something happened that they can only report to us. Ferdinand drummed a finger against his temple. If even the Grey Priest serving as guards knew, then that attendant of yours in charge of the orphanage surely has a report ready. Continue to your chambers and wait there. Under no circumstances are you to open the door to the carriage and ask the Grey Priest directly. I stopped, leaning forward, sat back down and straightened my back as we passed through the gate and arrived at the front entrance. Nicola was waiting there for us with Ferdinand's attendant. Welcome back, Lady Rosemine. I started walking with Nicola, all the while eyeing Fran and the others who were busily unloading our cutlery. Rosina's instrument and such from the carriage. They would probably catch up with us before we reached the High Bishop's chambers, so I decided to use this opportunity to probe into what had occurred in my absence. Nicola, it must have been a challenge having to welcome me all alone. No, my lady, not at all. Ella prepared sweets yesterday, so the most I need to do is make tea. It was more of a challenge carrying the divine gifts to the orphanage. Hugo and Ella had taken today off. There was no point in them being here when we were all eating at the Italian restaurant. Anything else they might have been needed for, they had prepared in advance the day before. Without Monica and the others here, I needed Gil and Fritz to help with lunch, which we delivered to the orphanage as early as possible, Nicola explained. We then ate there with the adults. The number of children in the orphanage had increased prior to the harsh winter. Nicola had spent much time in the orphanage and heard about the new children from Wilma and Delia, while also helping to prepare dinner for them. Has anything changed there? I asked. Are the Grey Priests the same as always? Now that you mention it, one of Brother Egmont's attendants came to the orphanage, which is very rare. He wanted to speak with Wilma about Brother Egmont securing a new attendant. Egmont wanting a new attendant immediately led me to a certain conclusion. Has he impregnated one of his attendants again? I didn't have a single good thing to say about Egmont, the blue priest who had once trashed the temple bookroom and who had sent his attendant Lily to the orphanage after getting her pregnant during my 2-year sleep. Nicola must have noticed my sharp tones, so she hurriedly corrected me. No, my lady, he wanted to take on another priest capable of doing paperwork. As Lord Hartmut becoming the new high priest means that he has more than twice as much to do as before. To my relief, he hadn't impregnated another attendant after all. At first he seemed to be taking his new work seriously. Perhaps I was treating him too harshly because of the tragic ordeal with Lily and the sorrow she had gone through. We are currently unaware whether this is a matter for the current or new high priest, Nicola said. Both were sharing the workload during the handover process, so I could understand the confusion, but I was sure we could entrust the task to either one of them. Hartmut already holds Egmont in low regard due to my distaste for him, I noted, recalling that his saint obsession knew no bounds. Egmont is sure to receive a more favorable response from the current high priest. Understood. I will inform Brother Egmont's attendant. Lord Hartmut does tend to exaggerate, but he's rarely wrong about things, so it's hard to correct him, he said with a giggle. How have Gil and Fritz been doing? They both rushed to their dinner with the Grey Priest. There's printing that must be finished before winter socializing, so the workshop is quite busy right now. This was the final stretch that would determine how many new books could be brought to the Royal Academy. They had chosen to speed through their orphanage work rather than leisurely eat in the High Bishop's chambers. Fran will protest if word spreads to him, so please do keep this a secret, she said. Apparently, it was normal for Fran to chastise them and say that they need to prioritize eating in their ladies' chambers and acting like proper attendants over saving time. But as she said that, a chill swept through the room. I can hear you, Nicola. Oh, shit. Cue my voice. Nicola and I almost jumped out of our skins. We turned around to find Fran carrying a box and wearing a cold smile, while Daniel stood nearby with a hand over his mouth as he fought back the urge to laugh. You got busted. Goodness, everything falls into disarray the moment I so much as look away, Fran said. Do take care, Lady Rosamine. A lady's slovenly behavior is soon reflected in those who serve her. He was insinuating that the current state of things was my fault, since my attendants were prioritizing work over their daily lives in the same way that I prioritized reading over mine. That was all news to me. Nicola opened the door for me, and I made my way to my room, feeling awkward all the while. As soon as I was inside, however, a lingering fragrance caught my nose. I instinctively stopped and looked around, but I couldn't see anything that would explain it, and soon enough this sweet scent faded away. Is something the matter, Lady Rosamine? No. It must have been my imagination, surely. I turned to the side, got Nicola and Monica to help me change, then gave permission for my attendants who had accompanied me outside to change into their priest clothes. Meanwhile, I drank the tea Nicola had poured for me and gazed around the room. Something felt strangely off. I couldn't say what exactly, but something was nagging at me. The sensation reminded me of a time in my Arano days when my mom had gone into my book storage room and taken the second volume from a completely unorganized pile. If she had tidied them all away, then I would have noticed in an instant, but such a minor change hadn't even caught my attention. I was stuck in an uncomfortable limbo, feeling like something was peculiar, but being unable to put my finger on it. What could it be? I continued to sip in my tea, unable to settle the discomfort swirling inside of me. Soon enough, Fran returned wearing his gray priest robe. He immediately called out to Nicola and said, "Did you enter my room while I was away?" Nicola received his question with a look of utter confusion. No, you were away, and there was no reason for me to. Even if the reason had existed, I cannot enter a man's chambers. I would have asked Gil or Fritz to go in my stead. I see. Understood. I noticed that Fran looked unsettled at that answer. I decided to talk to him, feeling that perhaps he shared my concerns. Fran, is something wrong? I am sure I smelled a woman's perfume in my room. I too detected a faint sweetness upon entering. Something feels off, and it seems entirely possible that someone came here while I was absent. I shall consult the High Priest about the matter once my things have been put away and we have confirmed whether anything was stolen. Understood. Fran went to fetch the key, Zomwit left to report my suspicions to Ferdinand, and Daniel immediately sent an ordinance to summon the guard knights who had returned to the castle following our meal at the Italian restaurant. All at once, the High Bishop's chambers had gotten extremely busy. You say that someone may have infiltrated your chambers, Ferdinand asked me with a frown. I performed a quick check, and it doesn't seem that anything is missing or misplaced, but something is wrong. I've had that feeling ever since we have returned. Ferdinand paused for a moment in thought, during which the scholars and guard knights summoned by ordinance arrived. Lady Rose, my Monica said in a quiet voice, having approached while I was explaining things to Ferdinand. Wilma is requesting an urgent meeting. Perhaps this is about the guard you found unsettling? Ferdinand mused, we will want to hear this. Let her in at once. I nodded, permitting Wilma's entry. Her eyes shot open the moment she stepped inside, and she froze at the sight of so many men. I had thought that she would be fine, but with how regularly she had been visiting the High Bishop's chambers lately, but her fear was presumably dependent on the number of men present and whether they were near her. Over here, Wilma, I said, gesturing her over to a corner of primarily women. It must be urgent for you to have come to me now instead of waiting for your report later tonight. She knelt before my chair, white as a sheet, her eyes flitting between Ferdinand and me. The grey priests who were guarding the gate this afternoon have all disappeared. The next set of guards had apparently arrived to relieve them of duty, only to find that there was nobody there. It was standard practice for them to be there be 4 guards at the back entrance to the lower city, and when carriages with business in the nobles' quarter passed through there, they would first have to state whom they had come to see and what business they had. 2 of the guards would then go to open the gate, and 1 would go to the nobles' quarter to announce their arrival, and the last would remain at the gate with the guest. It was a rule for at least 1 guard to attend the gate at all times. This is the first time this has ever happened. Furthermore, according to the Grey Priest who came after lunch to take their place, the gate was not properly shut, Wilma continued. To be more precise, they had been shut differently than usual. In short, visitors with the carriage arrived while we were away, I asked. It is secret at that, Ferdinand added. Surely there is nothing secret about this, I said with an exasperated sigh. They have taken 4 Grey Priests, then we would notice is inevitable. Ferdinand shook his head. Before you became the orphanage director, the Grey Priests in the orphanage had no way of speaking with Blue Priests. In the past, removing these guards would not have been of any consequence whatsoever. The Grey Priests were formally in a position where they couldn't speak until spoken to, no matter how many suspicions they had. Today's infiltrators were skilled enough to have noticed our absence and completed their task swiftly. They had employed trained methods and made it so that we couldn't tell what was taken, even when we knew that something was amiss. According to Ferdinand, back in the old days of the temple, such foul play wouldn't even have been discovered. You said that you felt only slight discomfort, Ferdinand said. If not for Wilma's report, it would have faded from your mind over the course of only a few days. Such minor concerns rarely stick without something to ground them. He was right. It was the kind of uncomfortable feeling that I would have readily dismissed as my imagination. Had I decided to sleep on it, I was sure it would have faded into obscurity come the very next morning. Ferdinand frowned so deeply that his eyebrows almost met above his nose. And once again he started tapping a finger against his temple. I expected our perpetrators had with them a noble with the power to make our Grey Priest disappear without a trace, relying on the established wisdom that nobody would even bat an eye. A chill ran down my spine as I recalled how Ferdinand had disposed of the evidence when dealing with Bezenwant's attendants. Had the 4 guards met a similar fate? Were the culprits here right now? I wouldn't be able to control my anger. They must be connected to a Blue Priest within the temple, but not one who is aware that the person in charge of the orphanage reports to you daily, Ferdinand said. It would be wise to investigate which Blue Priests have received visitors and whether anyone has seen a carriage enter the premises. The culprit likely believes they have brought themselves time with their otherwise flawless subterfuge. I stood up and turned to Daniel and Angelica. I wasn't about to let our intruders get away. Daniel and Angelica, split up and inform the soldiers guarding the lower city gates. Tell them that I am searching for a criminal who infiltrated my chambers and that I wish to know what carriages have been seen today. In fact, have them bring me all records of carriages that have entered or exited the city. I expect that Commander Gunter at the northern gate will cooperate at once. This is a battle of time. You must hurry. Yes, my lady. Daniel and Angelica raced out of the room without even the slightest hesitation. I returned my attention to the still kneeling Wilma. I am incredibly grateful for your report, I said. Inform Guild that there has been an infiltrator. Have him contact the Merchants Guild as well as the Offmark, Gilberta, and Planting Companies. I wish for him to ask whether they had seen any carriages that nobles might be riding in. The Offmark Company in particular was of close proximity to the temple, so there was a chance that he might have seen something. Woman nodded at my orders and stood. Furthermore, ask everyone in the orphanage similar questions, I continued. Did they see any carriages enter while cleansing themselves or drawing water? Please go away! Did they see any Grey Priests going to the noble's quarter to inform anyone of a visitor? Was anything discussed that might shed some light on the situation? Our intention is to pinpoint when these events happened. Anything will help. Lady Rosamond, I will go to the orphanage as well, Felina announced, stepping forward with stationery clutched to her chest. Wilma will struggle to ask everyone on their own, and this kind of questioning is the duty of scholars. Her grass-green eyes were focused on the task at hand, but at the same time I could sense the worry deep within them. She presumably wanted to confirm that Conrad was safe and sound. Very well, Feline. Please check that Dirk and Conrad are not scared. As you wish. Feline didn't see herself as being entirely detached from the situation. There was a very real chance that the same thing could one day happen to Conrad. She gave a somewhat rigid smile, then left with Wilma. Roderick, uneasy to see her go, picked up his own stationery. Lady Rosamond, No, Roderick, you have not visited the orphanage before, so your presence there would only serve to frighten the priests. They are more used to seeing Feline. Leave this to her. The Grey Priest couldn't risk speaking out of turn in the presence of a noble who was overwhelmingly higher in status than they were. As a result, they tended to maintain complete silence unless they could determine with absolute certainty that the person before them would permit them to speak and actually listen to what they had to say. Roderick being there wouldn't help at all. Roderick mumbled, the blood draining from his face. Have I not already told you this? Hartmut said as he picked up his own stationery. The orphanage, the workshop, the lower city merchants. These are Lady Rosamond's arms and legs, and if you do not acquaint yourself with the temple in its entirety, then you will not be of any use to her. What do you intend to do? Hartmut grinned with confidence. I could similarly speak with these in the orphanage, as my relationship with those is already one of trust. But there is other work that only I can do. I must be present as the High Priest to summon and question Blue Priests. It was true that only the High Priest and the High Bishop could summon Blue Priests. Plus, Blue Priests always took a very long time to arrive and spoke very leisurely. Hartmut, whose aptitude for scholarly work was impressive even among the nobility, was the perfect man to deal with them. I'm counting on you, Hartmut, I said. I shan't let you down, Lord Ferdinand. I place Lady Rosamond in your care, as I still do not know how far her influence in the lower city reaches. Ferdinand grimaced. It feels as though the most troublesome duty has been forced upon me, but very well. You may use my chambers and attendants as you wish. I am honored. Let's go, Lothar. Hartmut gestured over to one of the attendants that Ferdinand had brought with him, and then swiftly exited the room. Fran, let's thoroughly investigate these chambers to see what has changed, I said. Our intruder had an objective that they were desperate to achieve, even at the cost of eliminating several Grey Priests. We have reason to believe that your room was infiltrated as well, correct? Was anything missing or moved about? I cannot imagine anything in my room that nobles would... Zam raised a hand, cutting Fran short. Perhaps they were after the box in which you store your keys? That is just about the only valuable thing that you own as Lady Rosemine's head attendant. In other words, it seems reasonable to assume they were after an item that's locked away somewhere. We have checked once already, Lady Rosemine. We shall check the location where the keys are required once again, Monica announced, then shot from Fran a prompting look. He went to his room at once and returned a moment later with the storage box in question. I was more determined to find the culprit than ever, and with that thought in mind, I stood up to once again check the bookshelves. Before I could actually get anywhere, however, Ferdinand told me to wait. Leave what can be seen to your attendants, he said. You should instead investigate that which cannot be seen. Like what? I asked, blinking. Ferdinand waved a hand. I meant to say that assuming our unwanted guest is a noble, they may have set up dangerous magic tools instead of stealing anything. Search for those. The idea of the perpetrator being a thief was so deeply rooted in my brain for some reason that I hadn't even considered that they might have come here to set up dangerous magic tools. A simple look around didn't seem to reveal any new or missing things. Ferdinand, how can I search for magic tools? Spread your mana through the room like a very, very thin web. You will be able to detect any foreign items such as magic tools filled within another's mana or anything with traces of mana on it. This process is similar to detecting other people's mana within ingredients. The example he had chosen was something we had covered quite recently, so I knew just what to do. There are some magic tools that activate immediately upon detecting enough mana, Ferdinand continued. You will want to spread your own mana imperceptibly thin. Try to imagine diluting it with water, for example. I am impressed you will know how to use mana in that way, Lord Ferdinand, Cornelius said, having been listening in awe alongside my other retainers. Normally, one would not have any need to carefully check for the magic tools of others. Ferdinand met his remark with cold eyes and said, there was a time where I needed to check for them quite regularly. It was immediately obvious who had put him in such an environment, so I couldn't help but sigh. Now then, if my retainers would all stand by the wall, I said, their mana would naturally be considered foreign as well, so it was best to have them all clumped in the corner and out of the way. Once that was done, I took a deep breath, then spread out my mana as thinly as possible. I tried to picture diluting it with water, as instructed, then started my search for the floor. I could feel mana that wasn't my own from my retainers by the wall, and also from Eckert and Justice, who were standing behind Ferdinand. Even with my mana spread so thin, I could detect resistance from them. Strangely enough, I felt almost no resistance from Ferdinand, who was sitting right in front of me. Maybe I was simply used to his mana thanks to the hair stick he had just given me, and all the other magic tools on my body? Nothing on the floor reacted to my thin web of mana, so I slowly began working my way upward. Eventually, I started to feel resistance that wasn't coming from Ferdinand or my retainers. I stared at the source and slowly approached it. Lady Rosemine, Fran asked. I was staring at his storage box. The resistance was coming from somewhere among the many keys inside. There was something else as well, though. I gazed up at the shrine and tightly pursed my lips. Ferdinand, I found something. Tell me where, Ferdinand said, taking out and putting on a mana-blocking leather glove as he approached. The Bible and its key are not mine. It was hard to tell what exactly had changed. The items looked identical to how I remembered them, but they were registered with somebody else's mana. Both the Bible sitting normally on the shelf and the key lying so casually among the others resisted my mana. The Bible and the key, Ferdinand repeated. Why in the world would they take those? I do not know their objective, but I certainly know mine. Whoever's behind this is going to pay. Yeah, don't mess with her books. In any case, a book of mine is missing. It is only natural that I would search for it. Farewell. I started toward the door, but Ferdinand raised a hand. And where exactly do you think you're going? Do you have any idea of where it might be? No, but I'm going to use the technique you just taught me to spread my mana across the entire city, I replied, meaning both the lower city and the noble square. You are crazy! You can find other people's mana with this method, but not your own. It will prove useless in the noble square. Do not waste your mana, fool. Instead, consider the culprit's objective. If you can narrow down their goals, we might find ourselves on their trail. What are you talking about, I asked, blinking at Ferdinand in surprise. Our goal is obvious. You don't even need to think about it. He furrowed his brow and said, oh? It seemed that he didn't quite follow. There's only one reason why someone would take that Bible. They want to read the only premier edition in all of Ehrenfest. Had they asked me, I might have given them permission, but now they had disappeared. Those Grey Priests invaded the temple and tried to dupe me with this fake version. I would never let them touch it again. My logic was perfectly sound. No, it's not. Yet Ferdinand disregarded it with a sigh. If their goal was simply to read the Bible, they would not have had to have any need to infiltrate your room and replace yours. They could have read one of the transcriptions found in the temple bookroom or even had a blue priest transcribe it directly. What if they wanted to read the darkness prayer not found in the bookroom's copies? Or maybe they wanted to know something about the Haldensdale miracle? There are so many possibilities. Without wanting to admit defeat, I racked my brain for reasons why my Bible was superior to the other copies. You could read far more of it than Bibles from other duchies where the High Bishop was selected from the Blue Priest. Surely many would want it. My Bible is really special, Buster. I accept that those are both potential motives. The Sovereign Temple wanted to see the darkness prayer, and many nobles wished to know more about the occurrence in Haldensdale, but neither explains why they would replace it. They would not even be able to read it without your permission, considering that it has been registered with your mana. Could they not just register it with someone else, I asked, recalling that I had re-registered the bot key after becoming the High Bishop. It didn't seem like a very difficult process. That would impact which sections can be read, no? Is that why they replace it then? Because they want to read the parts that own mana wouldn't show? I already knew from my own comparison with the Sovereign Temple's version of the Bible that the amount one could read was largely dependent on one's mana, as well as the mana of the High Bishop. I couldn't imagine this was something many people knew about, however. In what way does not having the Bible cause problems? I would carry it with me to the chapel for ceremonies, but that was just for show in my case, since I had committed all the prayers I needed to memory. I never used it for anything else, so it usually functioned as little more than decoration for the High Bishop's chambers. I couldn't think of a single way in which I would suffer without it. Having hit the proverbial wall, I decided to approach the situation from another angle. What things couldn't I do without the Bible? It was only then I started to realize just how much my version had changed over time. Could it be that whoever stole my Bible is after the hidden message and magic circle inside? They don't even know it exists. The Bible was more or less an instruction manual for becoming king. I was sure that Ferdinand and I were the only ones who had seen that otherwise hidden content, though. Not even Hildebrand, a prince, had reacted, so I doubted that anyone else had noticed anything. Perhaps their objective was Ehrenfest's Bible itself, I said, trying to indirectly reference the magic circle. As I gazed up at Ferdinand, he had already been resting a contemplative hand on his chin, but upon hearing my remark, he discreetly extended a finger and pressed it against his lips, a clear indicator for me to shut up. It seemed that he understood my message loud and clear, but instead of verbally acknowledging it, he began to state his own theory. It is possible that one of their objectives is to put a black mark on your record. Each duchy has only one Bible, not including the transcriptions, and they can use this incident to call your organizational skills into question. They could even criticize me as your guardian and the high priest. But there's a replacement right there, I said, pointing at the Bible on the shrine. Ferdinand glared at it intently, then shook his head. There's no guaranteeing that's a true Bible. It could easily be a decoy magic tool that looks similar but is empty on the inside. However, let us assume that for a moment that it is indeed a true Bible. If we could prove this, then we could subsequently be accused of stealing it from another duchy. Not only will we have lost our own Bible, but we also have been falsely accused of stealing one ourselves. Perhaps that too is one of their objectives. The blood drained from my face. It was possible that we had already been set up as thieves without even realizing it. In that case, we need to find out whether it's real or once I explained reaching toward the shrine. I wouldn't touch that. Do not touch it. Ferdinand snapped as he smacked my hand away. A jolt of pain shot through my fingers, and as I gazed down, I realized that he hadn't held back in the slightest. Ow! Dude, you hit her full blast! That had to have hurt. There are 3 potential motives that I can deduce, Ferdinand said, giving the Bible on the shrine a hard stare. 2 are to stain your reputation, and the 3rd is assassination. An assassination, I repeated wide-eyed. The word alone was almost too much for me to say. They would much rather kidnap and imprison you such that they can use your mana as they like, I presume, but that is much harder to accomplish than an assassination. Killing someone is easier. They were capable of producing such a clever fake and planting it here almost without detection. I would consider assassination without a second thought. Ferdinand turned to Eckert, who whipped out his staff and chanted Messer to create a knife. He then reached for one of the pouches on his hip, took out a white fruit, and cut into its flesh. An instant later, he swung the fruit through the air, flinging a spatter of juice toward the Bible. Ah! I shrieked. Eckert, what are you doing? You're going to stain it! The moment the juice splashed onto the Bible, it turned red as if soaked with blood. Eckert gave the book a hateful glare before handing the remains of the white fruit to Justice. As expected, Ferdinand muttered, this red filth is a rare poison often gathered at the border between Ehrenfest and Ahrensbach. It seeks through the skin when touched, and if smeared upon something that is often touched without a second thought, then one might not even notice the poison until their fate is already sealed. Had we not noticed that our Bible was switched, Then come the autumn coming-of-age ceremony, the poison would have claimed 3 victims. You, as you took the Bible to the chapel, Fran, as he helped prepare it, and Hartmut, as he assisted you. Ferdinand waved a hand, at which point Justice took one of the potions hanging from his belt. I didn't think I would have to use this ever again, he said with a sigh, then began pouring the potion onto a cloth. Eckert put on a leather glove without hesitation, not even needing to be instructed, then took the cloth from Justice and started wiping down the Bible. I could clearly see that the potion was cleaning away the red smears of poison. It is a retainer's job to become familiar with poison such that they can protect their lord or lady from harm, Eckert said, addressing my retainers. Have you all studied to that end and trained your senses accordingly? Do you have any of the antidotes required to remove the poison intended for Lady Rosemine? Cornelius and my other retainers could only respond with a sharp inhale. Rosemine is the manor-rich saint of Ehrenfest, slated to become the next Archduke's first wife. That she would become the target of those who wish to weaken our duchy is only obvious, Eckert concluded, with still wiping down the Bible. Some guard knights you are. I saw Cornelius clench his fist. It was being thrust in our face just how accustomed Ferdinand was to being in life-threatening danger, as well as how cautious and well-prepared his retainers needed to be as a result. Cornelius, you lack Angelica's reaction speed and readiness to act, so you need to make up for that with sharp eyes and a mastery of the tools necessary to eliminate danger ahead of time. Eckert continued, Lord Ferdinand was and continues to be the one keeping Lady Rosemine safe right now, but he's leaving. Do you really still not understand what that means? Angelica never hesitated in my service, since she rarely devoted such thoughts to anything she did. She would point her weapon at anyone to protect her lady. I needed my other guard knights to fill their own roles, but Eckert maintained that they weren't doing this properly. I'm not saying that you each need to cover as many bases as Lord Ferdinand does now. That much is impossible for any one of you to do alone. But you have power in numbers. You will need to work together to at least try to fill the hole he's leaving. Eckert carried out various final checks on the Bible, including setting a face stone on it and spraying it with another potion. He then held it up to Ferdinand, who layered magic circles atop it before shaking his head. This is a Bible in appearance alone, he said. Had you brought it to a ceremony, Rosemine, then you would not have been able to open it. You would have embarrassed yourself in front of all those watching. So, in other words, that's not a book. It's a magic tool that mimics appearances. There's nothing on the inside. My Bible. Not only had they stolen my Bible, but they hadn't even replaced it with the proper book. My anger boiled over and the lid that was keeping my mana in check burst open. My body was radiating heat like a furnace as mana surged through me, but my head felt strangely cool. Lady Rosemine, your eyes, Judith explained, her tone betraying her shock and fear. All of a sudden, a large hand covered my eyes, blocking my vision. Do not get emotional, else disaster will strike, Ferdinand said. The string of maliciously layered tricks brings the Ivory Tower incident to mind. You are currently in the same position that Wilfrid was in back then. One careless move, and you will involve everyone. Do you really want to bring about an execution? He was right. Anything I did in this state would only hurt me, not my enemies, and shame those on my side. I took a deep breath, desperately trying to control my raging mana. We certainly do need to retrieve our Bible, Ferdinand continued. You are right about that. We simply need to pick the method that would cause the least collateral damage should we fail. Now, have you calmed down somewhat? Yes. Ferdinand took his hand away from my eyes, revealing the surprised faces of my retainers. He examined them for a moment, sighed, and then said, Now is not the time to be in a daze. It's rare for Rosemine to become this emotional, but she immediately loses control when her books or family are in danger. Learning to deal with this is another of your job as her retainers. I now understand the seriousness of your leaving, Cornelius muttered, evoking nods of agreement from Judith and Lenore. Ferdinand was thinking of strategies to recover our missing Bible when Feline burst into the room, having returned from questioning those in this orphanage. Lady Rosemine, something's wrong with Conrad, she cried. He's hiding in his bed and just keeps calling for your help. He likely knows something. Let us go to him at once, Ferdinand said, looking over his own retainers, Justice and Eckert merely nodding in response. Monica opened the door for us once we reached the orphanage, and we walked through into the dining hall. Delia and Dirk both looked relieved when they saw me, and they knelt down at once. Delia, how is Conrad doing? He was feeling unwell, so I sent him to take a nap. Something must have happened in that time, because when Lady Feline went to speak with him, he was trembling and refused to leave his bed. I made my way to the stairs at the back of the dining hall while Delia ran me through the day's events. Then I turned to my retainers. The girls' building is beyond this point. As men cannot go any further, I shall continue with Feline and Monica, with Judith and Lenore as guards. I started descending the stairs, leaving Ferdinand and the others behind, then entered the pre-baptism children's rooms on the first floor. Wilma and a number of small kids were anxiously calling out to Conrad. My apologies, but can I ask you all to leave? I wish for only Feline and my guard knights to be present, I said, noting that the room wasn't particularly large. Once everyone else was gone, I tenderly spoke to Conrad, who was still cowering under his covers. Conrad, it's me. Can you tell me what happened and who needs help? He poked his head out, his face ghastly white and rigid with fear. "Please help the Grey Priest," he said. "Are they still alive?" Conrad frantically nodded, unable to keep his teeth from chattering. I had somewhat given up on the Grey Priest when Ferdinand said they had disappeared, but it seemed that there was still a chance to save them. Hope surged within my heart once more. "I can save them," I said. "Can you tell me all that you know?" "A scary woman spun her staff and wrapped up all the Grey Priest," Conrad said, stumbling over his words. His eyes darted all around the room, brimming with tears. "She was scary, like Lady Junsara. She hurt them." "Oh, Conrad." Feline ran over and pulled her brother into an embrace. He clung to her, relieved, and continued to describe what he had seen, sobbing all the while. Conrad explained that he had come to this room after lunch, having been told to rest by Wilma and Delia. Once one of the windows offered a full view of the entrance for carriages, and as such arrivals were a rare occurrence, he had watched from the moment the gate first opened. The gate opened and a carriage came in, he said, having regained some composure, but then it suddenly stopped. The unusual turn of events had only made Conrad more curious, and a moment later, a woman had stepped out of the carriage, whipped out her staff, and restrained the Grey Priest. 3 men had then carried the priest into the carriage before shutting the gate, getting back into the carriage themselves, and departing. The noblewoman alone had stayed behind, bringing out her high beast and flying to the front entrance. "They might be okay still. Please save them like you saved me from Lady Jonsara," Conrad said. It seemed that the sight of the Grey Priest being bound and kidnapped had brought back some very traumatic memories for him, since he was used to being abused with a staff himself. I reached out and stroked his head, paying no mind to the sheer sheen of cold sweat across his brow. "I will save them," I said. "I have already instructed that information on the carriage be gathered by the soldiers at the city gate, and we will soon know which direction the intruders came from. You may rest easy." I tried to calm Conrad with the kind of smile like a mustard, but I was struggling to keep my outrage from showing on my face. Those thieves had stolen my Bible, replaced it with a poison fake, kidnapped Grey Priest, and now put Conrad in such a vulnerable state. At the very least, the fact that the Grey Priest had not actually been disappeared was very valuable intelligence. "Feline, will you remain here?" I asked, prompting her to look between me and her little brother, who was still clinging to her. Conrad gave Feline a tight squeeze, then gently pushed her away. "Sister, please go with Lady Rosamine. Save everyone. I'll wait with Dirk for you to get back." "As you wish," she replied, and so we returned to the dining hall, leaving Conrad with Dirk and Delia. Feline gave a small smile and said, "I'm glad to see that Conrad is becoming more mature, but as his big sister, it makes me feel a bit lonely, too." I made my way over to Justice, who was in conversation with Fritz. "Apologies for the wait," I said. "Ferdinand, the Grey Priest are still alive." "Come again?" "Conrad saw them being bound with light from a staff and put into a carriage. As soon as we have the intelligence we need, we shall rescue them." "I'm surprised they would kidnap them," Ferdinand replied, stroking his chin. "Making them disappear without a trace is much easier." Justice shrugged. "The former Veronica faction has been ostracized from the printing and papermaking industry, so perhaps they hope to learn something from the Grey Priests? And if said Grey Priests do in fact have information to give, they are very much likely alive." "I see," Ferdinand said. "That may be so, but they could also end up like the devouring soldiers. Our rescue plan must be swift and clandestine. Let us return to the Hibiscus chambers." We left the orphanage behind us while Justice and Feline told us everything they had discovered. As it turned out, there were several other important testimonies for us to consider. Feline spoke first, occasionally looking down at her notes. A great shrine maiden who was cleaning the temple mentioned that she had spoken with one of the guards sent to the noble's quarter. He had said that she needed to hurry and finish since a blue priest had a noble visitor. The guard had apparently said that the noble was especially harsh on Grey Shrine maidens and priests, which made it sound entirely like he knew them. According to Fritz, that gate guard was once Shikiko's attendant, Justice continued. The fact that he seemed so familiar with the noble suggested they most likely someone from Shikiko's family, and given that Conrad witnessed a scary noblewoman, it may be safe to assume it was Viscountess Daldov who loathes Lady Rosamine as the reason for her son's execution. Viscountess Daldov? She was the mother of Shikikoza, the knight who had gotten executed for his actions during a Trombe hunt back when I was a Blue Shrine Maiden. The head of the Daldovs had sworn not to get involved with me to avoid his entire house being executed as well, but I assume that they had since changed their mind, or maybe they had some way to escape being punished for this? As I pondered the matter, Damiel and Angelica came running back. "Lady Rosamond, we spoke to the gate commanders," Damiel said. "We have asked them to keep a close eye out for any carriages leaving in the near future. Information from the gates, which managed the coming and goings of carriages, was the utmost importance. All eyes fell on the 2 knights. I asked for your report," I said. "Yes, my lady. This time of year is when nobles from the north start arriving for winter socializing. Today alone, 10 carriages have entered Ehrenfest. None have left." To my knowledge, snow had already begun falling in the north. It wasn't until some time later that the weather reached the south, as nobles of some provinces inevitably arrived at the nobles' quarter sooner than those of others. 4 carriages used the north gate, complaining about not being able to use the nobles' gate as they normally would due to the absence of any guards there, Damiel said. Gunter said that this began occurring around noon. Dad clearly hadn't hesitated to start gathering intelligence. Given that no carriages have exited the city, were the Grey Priest perhaps take him to the noble's quarter, I asked. If so, they would have registered their mana to open the noble's gate, Ferdinand replied. We can learn who used it by consulting the castle. It was a reasonable idea, but such work was being done by nobles, so we would need to wait several days for a response. We simply couldn't spare that much time. Lady Rose, might I... Well, actually, Stenlook has a report for you too, Angelica said, stroking her mana blade. The West Gate had news of a suspicious carriage entering the city. Stenlook began speaking in Ferdinand's voice. The carriage was the kind that a commoner with a bit of money could use, but the driver had the speech and mannerisms of someone who served the nobility. It entered before third bell and left through the south gate. The south gate, I repeated. A soldier said that he tried to check inside the carriage after hearing a strange bumping noise, but he was silenced and forced to look away after being shown a ring with the noble's crest. Not much time has passed since then, Stenlook concluded. It was just too suspicious. I gazed up at Ferdinand and said, they couldn't have gotten far. We should at least go check it out. I shall accompany you. I cannot risk you going alone, he replied, then looked around the room. I must admit, it surprises me to see how much valuable information can be acquired from the lower city. But the testimony of commoners holds little weight against the nobility. We must acquire either the ring or the stolen Grey Priest without fail. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Rescue! Feline, Roderick, stay here in the High Bishop's chambers and transcribe. I said, Gil is due to return soon, and the new information he will surely bring must be organized into a single document. Fran will wait with you, but Fran, Zom, Monica, and I need you to gather intelligence for the attendants of the Blue Priests. You may be able to learn something they refused to tell Hartmut. I decided against bringing Feline and Roderick, who wouldn't be of much use in a fight, and instead instructed them to gather information with my temple attendants. They nodded and left with Zom and Monica to do just that. After seeing them off, I returned to my guard knights, who were standing in a row before me. I wanted to leave one of them here. Angelica was our raid leader. Daniel could sense the mana of devouring soldiers, and Cornelius had the most mana out of my guard knights, so the three of them were coming with us, without a doubt. I just needed to choose between Judith and Lenore. Judith, I want you to ride with me and my high beast. Prepare to both guard me and shoot down any targets, I said. Lenore, stay here and receive all the reports from the lower city and temple in my place. On top of guarding these chambers, the moment the situation changes, send an ordinance with the new intelligence. Understood. Daniel, Angelica, Cornelius, carry out any orders you may receive from Ferdinand. Yes, my lady. As I finished instructing my guard knights, Ferdinand, Eckert, and Justice returned, having finished their preparations. Lenore's expression clouded upon seeing us all together. Do you not have too few knights, she asked. Perhaps we should contact Op Ehrenfest and ask him to mobilize the Knights Order. And what justification can we give for that? Ferdinand asked in turn. To take back Ehrenfest by... Ferdinand shook his head, causing Lenore to fall silent. We are going only to rescue the Grey Priest, having by chance heard from the lower city that they had been taken away. Furthermore, while we have reason to believe that a suspicious carriage carrying the Grey Priest exited through the south gate, we cannot confirm this until we go there ourselves. Our focus today is to save Grey Priest, which is not a valid reason to summon the Knights Order. Lenore's indigo eyes were downcast, but then she suddenly looked up at Ferdinand. Could we not request that they protect you and Lady Rosamine? The Knights Order exists to serve the Archducal family. We could ask for additional guards from the Knights Order, that much is true, but if we inform the Obvia Ordinance that there is an emergency, our knowing may be leaked to the former Veronica faction, retainers still serving him. Sending a message is a safer choice, but we simply do not have the time. The matter requires no further consideration, however, as I do not intend to publicize the Bible's disappearance either way. Doing so would only serve to tarnish our reputations. If we wanted to avoid the world finding out about our Bible's disappearance, then we needed to resolve the matter using only the people here with us. Ferdinand continued, the Bible will ideally be with the Grey Priest in the carriage, but I expect that things will not be so convenient. We are dealing with someone who is attacking us from various angles to secure as much benefit for themselves as possible. They will doubtless have arranged for the Bible to be transported through other means. Furthermore, I would not expect a noblewoman who looks down on Grey Priests to ride in the same carriage as them. She is presumably traveling by high beast. We must also keep that in mind at this moment in time. Our assumption that Viscountess Dolph may be involved is mere speculation. We have no proof to substantiate our claims. Everyone nodded. Our first objective was to find and rescue the Grey Priest. If possible, we would also wanted to secure evidence leading us to the nobles involved. Cornelius suddenly shot his head up in apparent realization. Lord Ferdinand, do you have a plan to prevent devouring soldiers from exploding? He asked. During both the spring prayer attack and the attempt to kidnap Charlotte, the attackers and their rings had exploded, leaving absolutely no evidence. If we allowed the same thing to happen, then not only will we lose any potential clues, there was also a risk of the Grey Priest getting caught in the blast. We certainly do need a plan to stop the exploding. All eyes gathered on Ferdinand as we waited an answer. He glanced at me, then my lined-up guard knights, then let out a slow sigh. The most reliable method would be to kill them ourselves. We cannot explode without They cannot explode without mana in their rings, he said dryly. This will allow us to obtain their rings, but it will also make it harder for us to search their memories. If we wish for both, then we will need to sever their arms, heal them, then tie them up or toss them into a time-stopping magic tool so that they do not die. I gasped despite myself. The very idea was horrific, and the thought that it might happen before my very eyes made me sick to my stomach. Ferdinand must have noticed this, as his brow furrowed at once. You may stay behind, Rosemine, he said. Screaming in fright or otherwise panicking will only distract your guard knights, and that is beyond unacceptable. I understood that he was trying to spare me from what was bound to be a bloody battle, but I had promised Conrad that I would personally save the day. Not to mention, as the orphanage director and the High Bishop, I couldn't just run away when Grey Priests were in danger. No, I replied, I will go. We flew south by Kybes. Carriages were drastically slower by comparison, so we were bound to catch up before long if they had left a bell or less ago. We passed over the outer walls, crossed the freshly harvested fields, and traced along the road visible through the leafless branches of autumnal leaves. If only we at least knew where they were going, Judah said from the back seat of my panda bus. I considered the situation for a moment. They said that the carriage left some time after fourth bell, correct? In that case, they won't have enough time to make it outside the central district by nightfall. They will need lodgings without fail. Lodgings were seldom necessary for me, since I could transport all the Grey Priests to our destination in my panda bus. But most people didn't have survivable high beasts, and a normal noble wouldn't allow Grey Priests to ride with them in the first place. It was only natural that they would need somewhere to stay. Lady Rosemine, do you have any idea where they might be heading? Given that they are carrying bound Grey Priests, they most likely won't approach cities with winter mansions. The farmers here all moved there now that the harvest festival is over. This also means that the farming towns are largely empty. I would expect them to use the houses there. Winter being so close meant brutally cold nights. Our targets couldn't risk traveling slowly as one would during the summer. They would no doubt travel as far as possible, then stay in a vacant house without permission. A carriage would surely stick out in an empty farming town. I can't imagine they would turn in just yet, so if the people we're looking for haven't changed directions or boarded a boat, we should see them soon, I said. There's a crossroads up ahead, however. Both paths lead south, but I would rather we catch up before... A carriage! Judith had interrupted me with a loud shriek. I enhanced my eyes and squinted, and indeed there was a carriage below us. It was approaching the crossroads we had just been talking about, but it appeared to be stuck behind a luggage cart traveling in the same direction. The farmer pulling the cart glanced over his shoulder, then took the left road. The carriage took the right and accelerated at once, pleased that its path was clear, while the cart slowed down, relieved that the carriage was gone. Something about that felt strange to me. I cocked my head and gazed down at the cart, in particular at the wide cloth covering its luggage, when Ferdinand suddenly let out a sharp cough. Daniel! Daniel focused on the cart and carriage intently. He was the very best when it came to detecting trace amounts of mana, even now that he had more mana than before. He had purposely honed his ability so that he could detect others, according to Bonifacius. I feel very weak sources of mana in the carriage, Daniel said. They are most likely the devouring soldiers. From the cart, I feel only the faintest trace of mana, not even enough for a single devouring soldier. It must be carrying commoners. Understood. Everyone, move as we planned. Yes, sir. We're in a battle to save them now. I need to focus. I pricked up my ears, listening as everyone went over the plan, then looked across all the knights. Prioritize saving the Grey Priest above all else, I said. We can obtain evidence later, but we cannot restore lives. Everyone nodded in response. My main job was to offer a prayer, so I produced my staff and said, O God of War Ongriff, of the God of Fire-laden Shafts exalted 12, I pray that you grant these gathered your divine protection. Blue light shot from my staff. I confirmed that everyone had received the blessing, then moved away from them in Leslie. I needed to get into a position that Judith could effectively attack from. Will this do, Judith? Could you take this a bit lower? There, please step here. I stopped as advised and looked at the back seat of my panda bus. Judith had already taken aim at the carriage driver. We would need to start by separating him and the horse from the carriage, thereby bringing it to a stop. Judith's face was stiff, save for her trembling lips. She was being entrusted with making the first move, so it was only natural that she was nervous. Even if you miss, we have backup plans, I tried to reassure her. Focus on the task at hand and try not to worry. You have allies you can count on. Lady Rosemine, if I miss this shot, my life will lose all meaning, and Hartmut will scold me for wasting magic tools he gave me, Judith replied. Although she sounded more serious than ever, she also seemed to have relaxed a bit. She refocused on her weapon, and her violet eyes gleamed with confidence. I actually get to do something this time. Don't worry, I won't miss. I took out my staff, feeling tense. After she attacked, I would shoot a rot into the air to signal to the others that the battle had commenced. Yeah! Judith cried out as she launched a phase stone toward the carriage below. Hartmut had made a magic tool for her so that she could attack at long range. I didn't actually see the phase stone strike its target, but I did see the driver sway. Rot. I fired into the sky without a moment's hesitation. An instant later, a massive ball of mana flew past Leslie and trailed through the air, racing downward. It was Cornelius' attack meant to stop the carriage. The great light collided with the ground and then exploded, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. The horses reared in panic while the driver fell from his perch. Judith's aim had evidently been true. All at once, everyone raced toward the ground on their high beasts. Then one disappeared from sight. Angelica, buff with full-body magic enhancements, had dispelled her rifle so she could fall even faster. Yeah! Angelica launched an attack while in free fall, tracing a blue arc through the sky with her brightly glowing mana blade. Her cape was fluttering madly behind her, and she was falling so fast that my mouth went dry with worry. Then all of a sudden, the carriage lurched and stopped. She had cut through its reins and shafts in the blink of an eye, and the now freed horses wasted no time in fleeing. I don't blame them. Get the frick out of there, quick! Angelica had made the slice seem trivial, but it was anything but. It was beyond me at the very least to cut through the shafts in such a deceptively easy motion. One needed to build up so much mana that it was possible to blast even the horses into nothingness. That's our Angelica, Judith said, her voice bright now that she had carried out her role. That carriage won't be going anywhere, even with the horses rampaging around. I started descending toward the immobile carriage in my panda bus, but the attack was far from over. Eckert and Cornelius sliced open the side of the vehicle and went to pull out the devouring soldiers, but their hands still when they saw what was inside. If you come any closer, they die, came a voice. There was but a single devouring soldier in the carriage, and with him were two grey priests bound with rope. One was groaning in pain, a sword protruding from his side, while the other was being held in place by the soldier, with a blade pressed against his neck. "Hi, Bishop, help!" The grey priest taken hostage cried, inhaling sharply as he turned to look down at the sword threatening his life. The soldier would cut his throat much faster than we could approach. Eckert and Cornelius exchanged glances, distracting the devouring soldier, while Ferdinand went around to the other side of the carriage. Wait a second. I was continuing toward the ground suspicious when Daniel pushed through Eckert and Cornelius with a simple "excuse me." He then started to approach the carriage. "Don't come any closer," the devouring soldier yelled. "Do you not care about this man's life? Would you so callously sentence him to death in the presence of the merciful saint of Ehrenfest?" The soldier was clearly panicked, and the grey priest yelped as the blade started digging into his neck, but Daniel ignored them both. He raised his blade in complete silence, then mercilessly ran the grey priest through himself. What the fuck? His free hand reached at once for the devouring soldier's throat, and a beat later, the man was flung backward out of the carriage. "What the fuck are you doing, dude?" "What? Daniel!" Seemingly deaf to the cries of all those watching him, Daniel yanked the blade from the second grey priest's side and then thrust it through his throat to finish him off. "I have been guarding Lady Rosamund ever since she was a blue shrine maiden, so I know the faces of every single grey priest in the orphanage," he said, then turned to the devouring soldier. "Neither of these men were ours. Where are the grey priests?" "Knew it. I thought I didn't recognize them." The two dead grey priests were actually devouring soldiers who had disguised themselves with the actual grey priest's robes. It must have never even crossed their minds that we knew everyone from the orphanage. The surviving devouring soldier paled, now being held down by Eckert. "If you kill me, you'll never know where your grey priests are," he cried, trying to negotiate for his life. I sighed, watching him from inside Leslie. "We already know where they are. That cart we saw earlier was rather unusual. Farmers start moving to winter mansions after the harvest festival, as they need to prepare their harvested crops, make candles, and get ready for the long winter. That left road leads to an empty farming town, and no sane farmer would drive away from the nearest winter mansion during this important period unless something quite significant was happening." The driver was presumably a devouring soldier contractually obligated to obey the nobles keeping him alive, and one who knew nothing about how farmers lived at that. By avoiding cities with winter mansions to stay out of sight, he had made himself stand out and much more. "Let's go rescue the grey priest," I said, taking to the skies again. "Wait, Lady Rosamund," Cornelius shouted as my guard knights raced after me. "Eckert and I will interrogate this man and clean up this mess. Justice, stay with Rosamund. Keep her on a tight leash," Ferdinand ordered. He was referring to me like some kind of wild animal, which was quite rude if you asked me, but Justice obeyed all the same. "Yes, my lord." We returned to the crossroads and found the cart in no time. It was clattering along the road at a casual pace, much like before. Had it not been summertime, I wouldn't have even batted an eye. The sight was easy to interpret as a farmer making their way back home. The driver even had the appearance of a simple farmer. "Lady Rosamund, should we attack the cart like we did the carriage?" Cornelius asked. I nodded slowly. "Those other devouring soldiers didn't have rings, did they?" "Perhaps this person does. They used one to pass through the gate, so someone must have it. Let us get our proof." Eckert had immediately moved to sever the devouring soldier's hand after he was thrown out of the carriage, only to pause for a moment in confusion. That man hadn't been wearing the ring, but it was bound to be somewhere. I waved a hand, signaling for the ambush to begin, and Cornelius launched a mana attack without the slightest hesitation. Just like before, it caused an explosion that kicked up a huge cloud of dust, and just like before, Angelica leaped down to slice through the reins and shaft. What the? A driver yelped, sounding nothing like a trained soldier. He stared up at Angelica, who had landed on top of the cart and was now pointing Stenlook at him, then started crawling backwards, sputtering all the while. I didn't hear nothing about this. All they told me was to carry these guys out. Didn't think for a moment it was mixed up with anything dangerous. I couldn't tell whether this man was an actual farmer or just a devouring soldier putting on an act. Who are you working for? Angelica asked, thrusting her mana blade closer to the man's throat, refusing to let down her guard. The man trembled as the tip of the sword came within about a hair's breadth of his chin. Help me, he roared. Answer my question. I'm looking for... Before he could get the words out, thorns of what seemed to be pure light spread all around his body. Oh, he's a devouring soldier. I sank into his flesh, then slowly turned into golden flames. A ring hanging from his neck began shining at the same time. Angelica, I cried, sensing that an explosion was imminent. She flung her cape around herself, since it was embroidered with countless protective magic circles, and immediately leaped back. The man started to scream, but the explosion at his chest and the roar of the golden flames drowned out his voice. By the time the fire had subsided, he was nowhere to be seen. What was that? I asked. He must have been bound by especially powerful contract magic, Damien replied as he started toward the cart. He was presumably obligated not to speak of those who hired him or where he was going. Everyone nodded in response, not seeming all that surprised or disturbed, but my eyes were wide with shock. That's what happens when you violate a magic contract? I asked. Oh God, that's terrifying. This is my first time seeing it too, but there's no point in worrying about those who brought death upon themselves. And all that matters right now is whether the Grey Priests are here, Daniel said. He gripped his weapon, then cautiously tore away the sheet covering the back of the cart. Ah. Daniel winced and immediately replaced the sheet. It was a strange enough response that everyone tensed up and reined themselves for combat, but upon seeing this, Daniel merely unmorphed his weapon, and with a half-smile, gestured for them to relax. It's fine. The 4 Grey Priests are here, and nothing else. It's just... The women might not want to get any closer. The priests had their clothes taken, so they're naked. Apparently they were all stark naked, save for a single piece of cloth each. That wasn't good at all. They would surely catch cold in this weather. Ferdinand, we rescued the Grey Priests, but they are without clothes. Please recover the robes the devouring soldiers were wearing. I will use washing to remove the blood from them, I said, in an ordinance before sending it away. Even some torn robes were better than nothing. Justice returned to the carriage to fetch the clothes, while Daniel and Cornelius freed the Grey Priests from their bindings and started asking them questions, after very sensibly covering them with the cart's sheet, of course. Angelica continued to watch our surroundings, while Judith and I waited inside Leslie. Now that things had calmed down, a look of realization dawned on Judith's face. Lady Rosamund, am I going to be punished, she asked. I'm outside the noble's quarter, even though I'm still underage. Whatever do you mean, I replied. You never left the noble's quarter. Ferdinand already explained it, didn't he? We won't be making this incident public under any circumstances. The Grey Priests were never kidnapped, and we never left the temple. This, as well as the fact that our Bible had been stolen, would never see the light of day. And there was no way she would be punished when she hadn't done anything wrong. More importantly, please send an ordinance to the temple. We must inform them that the Grey Priests are safe. Right, she prepared an ordinance at once. This is Judith, Lenore. We have safely rescued the Grey Priests. Received its message. The ivory bird flew off. Fran would no doubt go inform those in the carriage that the Grey Priests were safe. The clothes are a mess, but I'm glad everyone's okay. Justice had struggled to remove the ropes from the devouring soldiers, so 2 had great slices across the front. He had found the other 2 robes rolled up inside the carriage, perhaps for later use, to prevent the other 2 Grey Priests from running away. The 2 priests stuck wearing tattered robes had to hold the fabric in place, but it was better than nothing. They could always get new robes from Wilma once they were back at the temple. I never thought you would come with knights, Lady Rosamund, one of the Grey Priests said. We are truly eternally grateful. It is only because Conrad witnessed your kidnapping through the orphanage window that I was able to arrive so swiftly. Please show him that you are safe when you return. Yes, my lady. The incident with the magic contract violator had given me quite the scare, but the rescue had ended safely nonetheless. We were preparing to make our way back to the temple with Judith in the passenger seat of my panda bus and the Grey Priest in the back when an ordinance came flying in. This is Lenore, my sincerest apologies, but if you have finished rescuing the Grey Priest, I must ask that you hurry back to the temple as soon as possible. I cannot start Hartmut alone. Oh, what? Hartmut? Sounds like Hartmut's a little busy. What are they going to find? Evidence. We reunited with Ferdinand and the others and hurried to the temple. Wilma, Fran, and Lenore welcomed us at the gate. Wilma, the Grey Priests are all safe, but their clothes are in tatters, I said. Please sort out some new ropes for them and allow them to spend the rest of the day recuperating. Understood, Lady Rosamund. Everyone, I thank you ever so much for saving them, Wilma replied, giving everyone a smile so joyous that you would think she was the one we had saved. We had all expected to be abandoned if something happened to us, so your actions today mean more than we can put into words. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. My retainers met this remark with conflicted smiles, and after Wilma returned to the orphanage with the Grey Priest, Daniel cheerlessly shook his head. We were only obeying Lady Rosemine's orders. If something like this happens again, and we aren't told to intervene, we unfortunately won't. Still, it does feel nice to be thanked. Oh my, but I will tell you to intervene next time. That much is guaranteed, so there's nothing to be so disheartened about, I replied, looking over my retainers. My eyes then came to rest on Lenore, who was waiting for a good opportunity to deliver her report. So, Lenore, what in the world happened with Hartmut? It might be best for you to see for yourself, she replied with a tired expression. Then she started leading us to the rooms for blue priests, which were located away from the high bishops and high priest chambers. She was being courteous enough to match my walking speed, so while the situation was exasperating, it must not have been especially urgent. Ah, you're coming too, Ferdinand, I asked. I am not uninvolved in this matter. Hartmut is using my attendants at the moment, and as none of them came to welcome us, I admit to some concern. It was heartening to know that he had decided to join us. I will entrust dealing with Hartmut to you if whatever we find is beyond my control, I said. He is your retainer. All responsibility falls to you, Ferdinand dismissively replied just as we arrived at our apparent destination. There was a Grey Priest standing in front of the door, and upon noticing us, he heaved a sigh of relief and allowed us to pass. Oh, welcome back, Lady Rosemine, Hartmut said, looking up at me with an exceptionally bright smile. I apologize that you must see this. The sight before me was far from normal. There was a tied-up blue priest lying on the floor on his front, and sitting on his back was Hartmut, holding what was presumably his staff in the form of a knife to the priest's neck. Around them were several Grey Priests struggling to tie up the restrained man's attendants. What the? High Bishop, help! The blue priest cried, flailing around in a desperate bid for freedom. I was speaking to Lord Hartmut when he suddenly enacted this violence upon me. Hartmut curtly slammed the pommel of his dagger against the back of the man's head. Have you no shame, pleading to Lady Rosemine of all people? My sincerest apologies. We were all watching in a daze. Lenore suddenly cried, What are you doing, Hartmut? You said you were just tying him up to keep any information from leaking. It sounded reasonable enough at the time, as keeping secrecy is indeed important, but... Hartmut had decided to visit the now-bound priest unannounced, hoping to seize him before he could run away or seek help from any nobles. I understood that it was pretty brazen to hold a meeting without making an appointment, but to Ferdinand's attendants it was unthinkably disastrous. They had asked again and again whether what they were doing was truly okay, and Fran had complained that binding a blue priest was very emotionally burdening for Grey priests. This is when I sent you the ordinance, Lady Rosemary, but I never thought he would bind the blue priest and threaten him like this, Lenore explained, then gave Hartmut a stern look. Hartmut, what in the world are you doing? Have you happened upon some especially fruitful evidence? He looked down at the blue priest with eyes cold enough to chill one's blood, then faced me and smiled. There is no notable evidence to speak of. However, he used crude language not suitable for Lady Rosemine's ears, so I simply asked whether he understood the implication of his statements and whether he had any proof. Given that this was a blue priest of the former Veronica faction, I could guess that this crude language was him calling me a commoner. Most would receive this with an eye roll, almost as if to say, Are you seriously still saying that? But with Hartmut in charge, such talk got you a pommel to the back of the head. Ouch. Yeah, well, that's Hartmut for you. The freaking guy's obsessed. Anybody who disrespects his lady and the Saint of Airfest is gonna get it. How foolish, Ferdinand muttered with a dismissive wave. Hartmut, you are wise to be concerned about information leaking, especially in a situation such as this. That said, your methods are a touch too aggressive. Have the blue priests gathered in the high priest chambers, put them under surveillance, and then have them work. We do not have time to waste on this, and your interrogation over these insults can wait. Is that understood? True, Hartmut replied. He then obediently stood up, noting that the interrogation would instead take place later, when he could take his time with it. Ferdinand quietly looked down at the blue priest who was still collapsed on the floor. You can stay here, restrained, until each blue priest has been questioned. Or you can work in the high priest chambers under Hartmut's supervision. The choice is yours. The blue priest gazed up at me, pitifully seeking my help. I didn't know what he expected. Both were harsh choices, but with Ferdinand and Hartmut, this concerned about leaking information, I could only shake my head. Sorry, but I can't save you. The blue priest gave a despairing look, then hung his head and weakly said, Please let me do work. Very well, Ferdinand replied. Hartmut, see to it that he completes whatever he is assigned to him. I will question the other blue priests. Ferdinand's attendants moved at once, unbinding the blue priest before taking him to the high priest chambers. We then needed to offer the same choice as the other blue priests. Hartmut had ordered to be bound. Things sure were busy. Have you learned anything else? Burnett asked. At most, that people were moving through the halls during lunchtime, Hartmut said. I will say, however, that I now see just how little the Blue Priest understands Lady Rosamund's wondrousness and the value of the Grey Priest in the workshop. I will need to correct this as they gather together for work. The rest I leave to you. Ferdinand watched as Hartmut chased after the twitching Blue Priest, then turned to me. Those who remain are Blue Priests likely to insult you. We have thankfully been given the opportunity to send Hartmut away before he sends them all traveling up a certain stairway. Yeah, we don't need him killing people. Where shall we begin? There are 3 Blue Priests who are particularly close to Shikikoza's family. All 3 came from houses in the former Veronica faction. He went on to list 3 names, one of which made my ears perk up at once. It's Egmont, I said. He's definitely the culprit. On what basis? My womanly intuition. He once messed with my bookroom, if you recall. Ridiculous. You are allowing a personal grudge to cloud your judgment. That argument does not hold water whatsoever, Ferdinand said, his brow tightly furrowed as he fixed me with a glare. I knew it in my heart, though. Egmont was the only one it could possibly be. There were absolutely no way it was anyone else. Cornelius shrugged. Lord Ferdinand, why not question Egmont anyway? All this changes is the order in which we interrogate the Blue Priests. You certainly are correct in that this discussion is a waste of time. I gave Cornelius a grateful smile, since he had convinced Ferdinand to go to Egmont's chambers. He grinned at me in turn and said, not to mention I trust Lady Rosamund's womanly intuition. No matter how tiny she is still a woman. Sorry, Cornelius, I interjected at once. Forget everything I just said. Ferdinand is right. This is just me holding a grudge. Having him agree with me rather than play the straight man was so embarrassing that it made me want to bury my head in the sand. In fact, it made me want the earth to swallow me up entirely. I cradled my head in agony while Cornelius fought back a smirk and gently patted my head. The High Priest and the High Bishop request an urgent meeting, Ferdinand announced. Open the door. No such meeting is scheduled, came a female voice in response. She was telling us to leave, but Ferdinand instead selected Eckert and Cornelius from our guard knights. They pointed at the room. Breach this door, but not with enough force to endanger those on the other side. Are you certain? Cornelius asked, looking troubled, but by that point, Eckert was already standing in front of the door with his staff morphed. Yeah, he has to obey the orders. Although I think he would do it anyway. I can do this on my own, Lord Ferdinand, he said, then swung his sword down. His confidence was clearly well-founded, as a moment later, a door slowly fell inward. We all blinked in surprise while Ferdinand just shook his head. I intended to give Cornelius some experience here, but very well. Naturally, the absence of the door meant we could now see what was happening beyond it. A shrine maiden was staring in complete shock, looking uncertain as to what had just happened, and further into the room I could see a blue-robed and a gray-robed figure sitting atop a bench. I made it perfectly clear that this is urgent, Ferdinand said, stepping over the door into the room and ignoring the nearby attendant. Eckert and Justice casually followed as I hurriedly did the same with my own guard knights. Upon closer inspection, the 2 figures on the bench were actually Egmont and a shrine maiden, and they had clearly been engaged in something quite indecent. Egmont had cried out when the door first fell through, and he cried out again when he saw me enter behind Ferdinand. This is outrageous, he snapped. Is the idea of scheduling completely foreign to you? Lowborns really are such animals. All at once my retainers began to radiate killing intent. Ah, it really is a good thing that we didn't bring Hartmut. Yeah, he would have killed this guy on the spot. He would have. And nobody would have batted an eye on that one. Cornelius remarked. Right, Angelica added. Even I nearly drew Stenlook. The 2 of them were cackling softly. Meanwhile, Ferdinand gave both Egmont and the girl, now scrambling to cover herself, up cold stares. You speak with such arrogance, but did you not go to the High Bishop's chambers unannounced when you took on that great shrine maiden as an attendant? Ferdinand said with a dismissive scoff. He was referring to something that had occurred while I was asleep in the Jareve, but I was already well aware of Egmont's crude behavior. The incident with him impregnating Lily and then taking a new shrine maiden in her place immediately came to mind. Egmont faltered, then puffed out his chest and pointed at me. Your deception won't last much longer, brat. We'll tear off that disguise of yours soon enough. Wait, is that? My eyes were immediately drawn to the hand that Egmont had raised to point at me, specifically to the face-stone set ring on his middle finger. It was gleaming beneath the light and decorated with a family crest. Oh, we got our evidence! Boy, am I glad they didn't show the girl. That would have been bad. He didn't have that ring before, right? Normally, a ring on the left middle finger was an indicator that someone was a baptized noble, which made this particular suspicious, as blue priests seldom underwent such baptisms or received the mage-crafted ring that came with them. Some chose to wear rings passed down through their family, but Egmont certainly hadn't worn one before, and the only other person I could remember seeing with rings like his, were devouring soldiers with submission contracts. Egmont, that ring, I said, drawing the tiny band to everyone's attention. An instant later, my eyes were covered as Ferdinand drew his cape around me. What? I gazed up just in time to see Ferdinand simultaneously morph his staff into a sword and swing it downward. My vision was still obscured, but a collective gasp rang in my ears, followed almost immediately by a piercing scream and the spatter of what I could only assume was blood. He cut off the guy's hand! He did! That's exactly what he did! Because if he had killed the guy, he wouldn't have screamed. The abrupt chaos was punctuated with a dull thud which came from somewhere in front of me. Egmont screamed and his attendant did as well. I could imagine what was happening, but the most I could see was Ferdinand's cape and armor. Ferdinand quietly began giving instructions while keeping his staff pointed at Egmont. Eckert, Justice, fetch the magic tool from Rosemind's workshop. Judith, Lenore, take Rosemind to the High Bishop's chambers and ensure she does not leave before I call for her. Daniel, Cornelius, Angelica, bind all this man's attendants. Sir. Eckert and Justice moved at once. The former patted Fran on the shoulder and said, "Open the door to her chambers," before briskly walking away, while the latter wasted no time in hefting me into his arms. Excuse me, my lady, but we're in a hurry. Judith Lenore let us go, just as they instructed, then started carrying me to the High Bishop's chambers. Fran had already opened the door for us by the time we arrived, and Eckert was waiting in front of the door to my workshop. Rosemond, would you mind opening it for me? He asked. I need the magic tool. I opened the door and permitted both him and Justice to enter. They retrieved the time-stopping magic tool and then promptly left. Are you feeling okay, Lady Rosemond? Lenore asked, looking at me with worry. Seeing all that up close must have been disturbing. I shook my head. I'm fine. Ferdinand was covering my eyes the whole time. Are you and Judith okay? We are knights, you know. We exchanged smiles, at which point tea and sweets were served. Hopefully these tasty sweets cheer you right up, Nicholas exclaimed with her usual radiant expression. It really made me feel as though things were back to normal as I sipped my tea. So what happened, Lady Rosemond? Roderick asked, his voice tinged with concern. There was a blue priest with a suspicious ring, I replied simply. We are leaving his detainment to the high priest and the guard knights. I will carry out my own job. Has there been any news from the lower city? I certainly wasn't suited to capturing and interrogating criminals. As I changed the topic of conversation, Feline produced some note paper and started delivering her report. This is from a commoner by the name of Judd, who works for the Offmer Company. The lack of guards at the temple gate resulted in several drivers patronizing her business to buy sweets for those waiting in the carriages. The first of them arrived a bit before 4th bell. It seemed that all this had started right after we went to the Italian restaurant. Furthermore, Feline continued, it seems a man who had appeared to be the servant of a noble arrived at the Italian restaurant requesting to eat. He was refused due to your meal of Lord Ferdinand, but some have mentioned seeing him linger outside nonetheless. Perhaps that man was keeping an eye on our movements, I mused aloud. It really is suspicious that they knew precisely when we were absent. Roderick was next to deliver his report. According to the Gilberta Company, a man appearing to be the servant of a noble arrived at their store between 3rd and 4th bell, seeking cloth dyed in the new style. He introduced himself as a merchant, but his speech, mannerisms, and attitude toward the staff made him seem like someone who spent a great deal of time among the nobility. He seemed to have asked what kind of cloth you are interested in, Lady Rosemond. It was common practice to seek out one's own personal preference when dealing with new dyes. Most nobles who order cloth would request to be shown various examples, then select their favorite and ask for the name of the workshop or craftspeople who had provided it. Nobody in the Florencia faction would simply ask for the same cloth I preferred. Almost had purchased. What was his goal, though? Perhaps he was plotting to somehow tarnish the Gilberta Company's good name, I said. Tuli worked there as a Laharo, and we had to consider the possibility that she was being targeted as my hairpin craftswoman. Justice returned while I was listening to the reports. My sincerest apologies, my lady, but Lord Ferdinand has asked for you to fly to the castle. It wouldn't have been impossible to move the captured priest by carriage, but if one wants to get Egmont's attendant and the time-stopping magic tools to the castle as discreetly as possible, my panda bus was the best option. Leslie could go straight into the castle, while carriages need to be checked at the entrance gate. I took my guard knights and prepared to leave for the castle. We were going to be transporting the 4 bound attendants and the time-stopping magic tool, so my knights put them all into my panda bus for me. Ferdinand watched them work and then turned to me. I apologize for making you do this, Rosemond, he muttered. I don't mind. This is all for the sake of getting my Bible back, I replied. It was easier for me to help than leave everything to Ferdinand and the guard knights. Your job is to move them to the castle. Return to the temple immediately after. There is much you need to do here. The orphanage must be looked over, and the blue priests working in the high priest chambers need to be freed. And so I started making my way to the castle with Ferdinand flying in front. Judith was sitting in the passenger seat of my panda bus, while Angelica and Lenore were in the back to make sure the attendants didn't try anything funny. As we continued on our journey, I noticed that Ferdinand was heading somewhere other than the Archducal family's living quarters, which was unusual. Instead, there was another location coming into view, one that looked a lot like the training grounds where the knights gathered in preparation for the Lord of Winter hunt. Do you know where Ferdinand is heading, I asked. Angelica pointed at the numerous knights waiting below and simply replied, a place where criminals go. We landed soon after, and while my guard knights were getting the attendance and the time-stopping magic tool out of my panda bus, Karstedt came over and patted my head. Sorry that you had to go through all that, Rosamine. We'll get the clues and evidence we need out of them now, so you can leave the rest to us and take it easy for a while. But I can't do that while... I attempted to protest, but Karstedt cut me off with a swift flick to the forehead. You need to prepare for what's coming next, he said. Capturing the Blue Priest isn't the end of all this. If anything, it's only the beginning. Okay. It's gonna have to be the end of this one, and I'll see y'all next time.